I saw a crazy chick running down the street. I said, ooh, pretty baby, why the ready beat? She said, wow, what a square, don't you dig the scene? Daddy Cool's a playing his piano machine. Daddy who?
My Life in Song by Rob Lamb. Part 1. Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. From the time I was 3 years old, I had been obsessed with listening to rock music. At the time, I didn't have many playmates my age in my Central Ohio neighborhood, so I spent most of my waking hours alone with my 45 RPM singles and record player. I had played some of my favorite records so much that the labels and the song titles and the record company logos were completely worn off. My mom and dad used to challenge their friends to pick any record out of my stack of 45s to see if I could guess the title of the song. Not a problem. I had memorized the length of the grooves of the vinyl. My parents appreciated me providing free entertainment for their guests, and maybe they enjoyed showing off their gifted child. In addition to listening to my records all day, every night I would fall asleep listening to WCOL, the local rock station in Columbus. I even took a transistor radio with me to school. One day, walking home from second grade while listening to my radio, a song blasted from my 2-inch speaker that stopped me in my tracks. The sound and the vocal harmonies that I heard come blaring out of my radio was like nothing I'd ever heard before. I brought the speaker closer to my ear and just stood still for the next 2 minutes and 45 seconds, spellbound.
I'll tell you something, I think you'll understand when I say that something, I wanna hold your hand.
2 weeks later, my sister Jan, who was 10 years older, invited me to join her for a homecoming decorating event in the gym at the Worthington High School. I was sitting in the balcony as she and her classmates put up streamers, balloon bouquets, and lots of colorful decorations. Then the DJ cranked up his speakers for a sound check, and there it was again. The DJ testing his microphone said, "Hey everybody, that's the new hit single from the 4 lads from Liverpool, England called The Beatles." Did he say The Beatles? Like the bugs my mom would scream at when they appeared in her shower? I came home and told my parents about the new music from the Beatles, and I asked if my mom would drive me to the local Woolco department store in the Graceland Shopping Center so I could purchase their record. That's when I first laid eyes on their American LP called Meet the Beatles. Meet the Beatles, released in the U.S. on January 10, 1964, spent 11 weeks at number 1. On Friday, February 7, 1964, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr arrived at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, greeted by scores of screaming and swooning fans, mostly excited teenage girls wanting to catch a glimpse of the Fab Four. It was Sunday, February 9th, just 2 nights after the band arrived in the U.S., that 73 million viewers watched the Beatles make their American television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show.
The Beatles! Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you.
I decided right then and there I was going to be the next Ringo Starr and learn how to play the drums, just like Ringo. Fortunately, my dad had played the drums and bought his first drum kit while serving in the U.S. Navy in the Pacific during World War II. Given a combination of musical talent inherited from my dad, my own Ludwig Sky Blue Pearl drum set, and a carpeted stage in our rec room, I was ready to rock and roll. I drummed along with the Beatle hits like She Loves You. I saw her standing there. And my favorite, We Can Work It Out. Soon after my inspiring, life-defining moment watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, my dad drove me down to High Street to Coyle's Music Store for my first drum lesson with John Tagenhorst. I was only 7 years old, but there I was, taking lessons from one of the best musicians in all of Columbus, Ohio. Tagenhorst was an accomplished Ludwig clinician and was most known for his epic arrangement of Hang On Sloopy for the Ohio State Marching Band. After a couple of lessons, John pulled my dad aside and said, "I don't think Robbie is ready for drum lessons yet. Just let him enjoy playing the drums on his own until he's more mature and ready to grasp reading music." Fast forward to my first year of middle school. I was 13 years old in 7th grade and taking drum lessons again from Tagenhorst. Doug Lowe, probably my best friend in junior high, happened to share a love for rock and was the only kid I knew who played electric guitar. Doug introduced me to his neighbor, Ian Pete Seeds. Pete connected us with his fellow 8th grade friends, Tim Holscher, who played a Gretsch Tennessee hollow-bodied guitar, and Richard Bradburn, who played a trendy Farfisa portable organ. Pete invited the 5 of us to bring our instruments to his house in the Wilson Hill subdivision for our first band jam. I can't describe the feelings I had when I kicked off Mustang Sally on the drums. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mustang Sally.
Pete's strumming 12-string kicked in with Doug's rhythmic electric guitar and the fullness of Rich's organ sounded completely amazing to me. So this is what it's like to actually play in a band with other musicians. Simply magical. Our favorite bands during that time include the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Cream, and the Beatles. We had to come up with a cool name for our newly formed band. Someone said, "What about the Marsh Hare?" Don't ask me what a Marsh Hare is. Well, the Marsh Hare put together a set list that would make any classic rock band jealous, which included Hendrix's Purple Haze, Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild, and the Zombies' Time of the Season. However, the word started to spread. The Marsh Hare was the newest band from Worthington, and we got gigs at our school, the Ohio State School for the Blind, and most notably, we made our first television appearance on Gene Folan's Dialing for Dollars, a local live show on WTVN-TV. It was a midday morning show, so all our classmates sat at their school desk and watched us perform Born to Be Wild on TV. When we appeared back at the school, we seriously turned some heads walking down the hallways. We became instant rock stars and legends in our own minds. In the 60s, Columbus had 2 premier bands that I had the privilege of seeing perform live. One summer night when I could hear the Fifth Order playing at the Evening Street Elementary School tennis courts all the way from my house in Kilbourne Village, I quickly hopped on my Peugeot 10-speed bicycle and made a beeline to the tennis courts. I moved through the crowd of teenagers right up to the edge of the stage and locked in all my attention on the drummer. Worthington also had its own popular rock band called the Dantes, featuring Barry Hayden on vocals and Dave Workman on guitar. Their local hit, Can't Get Enough of Your Love, got lots of airtime on our local rock station WCOL. These bands were role models for what I wanted to accomplish, having a hit single on the radio and playing live gigs. My parents turned my plan for future rock stardom upside down when they decided to move from Worthington to a nearby suburb of Upper Arlington. In the first month of 8th grade, I had to uproot from my friends, my band, and all that was familiar. During my exile to Upper Arlington, Rich and Pete formed a new band called The Forum, with bass player John Paoletti and drummer-singer Mike Knoll. Man, did those guys sound great together. I was both jealous and sad I couldn't be a part. At the end of my 8th grade year, my parents could tell I was unhappy and felt sorry for me. They happened to find another home they liked in our old Worthington neighborhood located on Farrington Drive. It wasn't long before we moved back to Worthington, my hometown, and I started jamming with Rich and John in our basement. We called ourselves Social Mobility, and we eventually added Mike Knoll, who is a very good singer and played drums too. Bands like the Doobie Brothers and the Allman Brothers had 2 drummers, so we gave it a try and started to play some gigs. My dream was coming true, minus the hit single on the radio. The following year, my bandmate and buddy Rich Bradburn got his temporary driver's license. Now that we had wheels, we didn't have to rely on our parents to chauffeur us and our gear to gigs in their station wagons. Rich and I met some amazing musicians in Bexley, Ohio. We formed a band together called Little Pleasure that featured a killer horn section with Tim Donovan, Robbie Livingston, Bill Whitlock, plus guitarist Harley Kaplan, bass players Jeff Edelstein, Dave Tyak, and drummer Tom Herman, a gifted musician and arranger. Rich played keys and sang while I played some percussion. I was just happy to be in a professional band that covered great music from horn bands like Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and the Ides of March. Our regular shows at Jeffrey Mansion in Bexley always drew a packed house of enthusiastic local fans. We met a lot of great kids, especially cute girls. One gal, Jill Kreiselman, who lived in nearby Walnut Ridge area, eventually married Rich. Starting my sophomore year at Worthington High School, Rich and I met Dennis McCammon, a bass player from my class who introduced us to guitarist Gordon Barnes and Rick Calora. That was the beginning of a new band called Prism. We started gigging at schools and events all over the state of Ohio, thanks in part to a local booking agency called Dynamic Entertainment. We would rehearse in Richard's basement studio during the week and then pack up our gear in our Ford Econoline van that Rich's mom, Marjorie, financed for us. We were playing 2 to 3 gigs a week, mostly on the weekends. Whenever we had an open date in our calendar, we would sponsor our own Prism parties at the Powell Party Bar. Prism parties became legendary at Worthington High School. Like the Woodstock Festival, but on a much smaller scale, we did not anticipate the number of kids from around town that would pack the party barn for 3 hours of dancing and rock and roll. For the most part, everyone behaved themselves, although one Prism party was shut down early by the local police due to underage drinking and whatever else might have been going on in the parking lot. Another memorable Prism experience was at the local East High School talent show held at the historic Ohio Theater in downtown Columbus. Not sure how a bunch of white suburban kids got invited to this annual event sponsored by an all-black inner-city school. We set up in the orchestra pit on a hydraulic stage that lifted us up above 1,000 screaming kids. They went wild as we opened with the intro riff to Santana's Evil Ways. We didn't play much soul music, but the hyped up crowd was rocking with us anyway. We even closed our third song set with Roundabout by Yes. The place exploded. In the early 70s, 2 types of music greatly influenced our playlist. Progressive rock bands like Yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and jazz fusion and soul music from bands like John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and Chick Corea, Return Forever. We attempted some pretty ambitious covers of Yes songs like Roundabout and Yours Is No Disgrace. To get the kids out on the dance floor, we also covered popular tunes by Sly and the Family Stone, Joe Walsh and the James Gang, Edgar Winter, and Steely Dan. One of the greatest experiences for me playing with Prism was the original music we created and recorded with the help of our friend Terry Dowds. Terry attended Whetstone High School just north of Worthington and was a talented musician who played stand-up bass. He also was one of the few kids our age to own a 4-track reel-to-reel tape recorder. Terry invested significant time converting our rehearsal studio into a recording studio. One of our first originals, All That's Left Is a Song, was over 7 minutes long. featuring Rich's Hammond B3 and vocals with Dennis McCammon's bass riffs played on his Sunburst Rickenbacker bass, complete with Rotosound round wound strings, just like Chris Squire, the bass player for Yes. Now that we had a hot demo of our own music, we thought, it's time for Prism to be discovered and signed by a record company. That's when former manager of the Forum, Scott Pete Hurst, showed up with a full-size Winnebago mobile home and offered to take the band to California to meet with record companies. Our entourage included myself, Rich, Gordy, John Paoletti, Dave Tyak of Little Pleasure, and Prism's faithful roadies Tom Bartlett and Jeff Fenstermaker. This 2-week magical mystery tour, yes, it was that kind of trip, took us through the heart of the Midwest, Texas, Arizona, and then the west coast of California, where we actually played our tape for a music publisher. Unfortunately, they weren't ready to sign a band of teenagers that had yet to write a radio-ready, marketable song under 5 minutes. We consoled ourselves, hey, the Beatles were rejected at first too. The most memorable part of our adventure took place during a stop in the Grand Canyon. Pete parked our mobile home at the top of the south rim of the canyon. He gave us clear instructions to enjoy ourselves on the South Rim Bright Angel Trail, but be back to the mobile home by dinner time, ready to depart. Most of us hiked down the switchback trails into the canyon on the sweltering hot summer day. Then we came back up. Pete was waiting patiently in the mobile home, ready to hit the road, but we were missing John and Tom. As the chill of the night desert air drove us to shelter in the Winnebago, we waited and waited for our friends to make it back up the trail. After waiting all night with no sign of them, we became worried. We contacted the park ranger and filed a missing hiker report. Unfortunately, they had no sightings of our missing friends. Later that morning, the ranger called to inform us they had found John and Tom and arranged a phone call between us. The problem was, they were calling us from the north rim of the canyon. Apparently, these two were a little disoriented when they reached the bottom of the south trail. Instead of hiking up the south rim, they wandered north. We were thrilled to hear their voices and relieved to hear they hadn't been eaten by a wild animal. Looking at a map, they hiked the Bright Angel Trail, which is over 24 miles from the south to the north rim. When they asked us to pick them up, we saw the most direct route by automobile was 220 miles around the perimeter of the canyon. After that revelation, we considered asking them just to hike back. Returning home without landing a record deal, Prism continued to play a steady stream of weekend gigs over the next couple years, with a few personnel changes. During that time, John Paoletti took over bass duties and recorded a number of Prism originals with us. Donald Payne, also known as Thump Daddy, from the east side of Columbus, was the last bass player while I was still drumming with Prism. You can hear Donald slapping in it on Prism originals like Do It and I'd Like to Show You. I was a B average student at Worthington High School. My best report card was my last semester, earning almost all A's and an early release to spend more time with my band and my newfound Christian fellowship group called OSU Bible Studies. I tried to balance my new position as a licensed booking agent for Summit Enterprises, traveling with Prism, and my increasing desire to grow in my new faith and participate in church activities. Over the span of 6 months, it became more and more evident I was holding the band back from developing to the next level. Tension and tempers flared when I disclosed I didn't book a gig for New Year's Eve because of a conflict I had with a church activity. It was a hard decision to leave my band and the bandmates I had spent most of my childhood gigging with. I committed to completing our remaining couple of months of gigs, including our last night together at a venue called The Underground on High Street, across from Ohio State. I recall we played 4 original songs, including Put Out That Cigarette, which had a challenging 9/8 time signature. When it was over, Rich dropped me off and my drums at my campus house where I lived. I went into my room, shut my door, and let out some deep emotions. I had chosen to leave behind everything musical I had wanted since that spell-binding Sunday evening in '64 when I first saw Ringo play the drums. This crossroad represented an opportunity for Prism to upgrade and acquire better talent and players who were more available to travel extensively. For me, it was a proverbial fork in the road, of which I took the road less traveled and began a spiritual journey of faith into the unknown.
Are you reeling